Hey guys, so we're going to go over the evolution study guide. Question number one, we have the picture of the horses, and you see we're moving from past time to present time. What is the main change that you see in the horse over time? It's pretty obvious. And if you look over here to the right, I'm going to have it written down to you just in case you can't hear well on the video. So the horse is increasing in size over time. Other changes were happening too with structure of the mouth and the skull and the bones of the hoof. But the main change that we're going to be focusing on for this test is increasing in size over time. So question 2 and 3, you're going to make some observations about these fossils and you're going to infer with those observations. So looking at the first one, this is the Archaeopteryx, and we can see that it has feathers, it has claws, it could fly, but if we look at the skull, which we see the neck's kind of bent backwards, in this picture especially, we don't have a lot of detail, but it's kind of hard to see the mouth to see what it might have ate. So we can't see the details of the mouth to make an educated guess on what it ate. If it was an omnivore eating meat and plants, if it was a herbivore eating just plants, or if it was a carnivore eating just meat. The next picture, we have some fish. A couple of students the other day were calling them sticklebacks. I don't believe that they are the stickleback fossils, but they possibly could be. But one of the main observations that you can make is that they're fish, and if it's fish, we know they lived in a water environment, which is what we're going to focus on for this one. There's other inferences that we could make if we were to zoom in and to know if all these fossils were found in the same area at the same time. But for this section, we're just going to focus on they lived in a water environment. Seems kind of obvious, but those are some of the clues that fossils give scientists about where they came from and what the world looked like when those fossils were living. So what are 3 reasons for studying fossils? Why is it important? So one of the first reasons is that they present detailed traits of distant ancestors. So looking at the fossils, we can see the ancestors of organisms that are alive today, try to link up the family history, and see how they've changed over time. The second is they are used to determine characteristics of an ancient environment. So like we just did, looking at the fish, we can tell that they don't have any structures in their fossilized bones to walk on land. So we can infer that they lived in the water environment. So that's giving clues to the characteristics of the environment. Number 3 is they show evidence of the diversity of organisms. So because they don't all look the same, diversity means different. And we can tell that even in the past, we have lots of different types of life roaming around on the earth. Question number 6, we have a diagram. And we have some layers of fossils underneath the ocean. What are some observations and inferences that we can make about this picture? So we've learned that unless we have some type of event happen that causes the land to shift, the lowest layer on bottom is going to be the oldest, and it's going to increase in time to the top layer being the most recent fossilized organism. So one of the things that we can infer here is that modern forms of life may have developed from earlier forms of life. So here we have a fish-like creature that looks pretty simple. We move up, and this fish-like creature has gotten a little bit more complex, and then again gets more complex as the time goes on. But because they are similar, we can assume that they were related. So then one would descend from the other. So we know layer X came before layer W. Layer W did not come before layer X. Most recent on top, oldest on bottom. We'll come back to that in another question. Question number 7, why is the fossil record considered incomplete? Well, one thing that you might learn about in elementary school is that fossils are not easy to make. The conditions have to be right in order for the remains to be preserved. Scavengers might spread out the remains of organisms, and if an organism doesn't have any hard parts, such as a shell or bones, then it's not going to be fossilized. So organisms had soft bodies that did not form fossils is our main answer for number 7. Question number 8. The fossil record is assembled by combining the data scientists learn from the fossils they study. What does the fossil record allow scientists to develop? So it can't create a history of Earth over time. It can, however, show a timeline showing the evolution of life from earlier species. So it gives us clues. We don't have all the data, but we have enough to create a timeline of the evolution of life over time. And if you look at the back of the room next to the door underneath the red folder, you can get up and look and see an example of that timeline and how life has changed over time. Question number 9, the table contains information about fossils. So we see some fossils over here: trilobite, catfish, armored fish, sauropod, and coyote. And then we have their age. Now notice this one only says years. It does not say million of years. I had a couple of people that got that mixed up working on the study guide. So now you're going to put them in the correct order of where they most likely be found in the layers. So if we're in the layers of rock again, the oldest is going to be on bottom and the youngest is going to be on top. So since this one only says years and the rest of them is millions of years, I know coyote is going to be at the top. And then if I look, 150, 465, all right, so trilobite is going to be our oldest one right here. So that one will go on the bottom, to the oldest layer on the bottom. All right, and the next question is pretty simple. What could a scientist determine about the diet of a fossilized organism that has sharp, pointy teeth? And I've added a picture here for you. So we see all sharp, pointy teeth. Don't really see any flat molars like we have in our mouth. So if we did see sharp teeth and molars, we would say omnivore, for plants and meat eater. But since we only have sharp teeth, we would assume that it was a carnivore or a meat eater. All right, now we have some questions using the map. So on which continents have the Velociraptor fossils not been found? So here we just have to look and see. Velociraptor is a star. You see there's a star on this continent: South America, Antarctica, Australia, Asia, and Africa. So we see there's no fossils of that organism on North America, so our answer would be North America. Now question number 12 says, which fossil was spread over the smallest area? So we see that if we start with the square is over a pretty small area. But we're going to look at the others just to make sure before we answer the square organism here. So the stars we have on South America, over to Africa, and down to Antarctica. So that's a pretty wide area, much bigger than the squares. So let's look at the circles. Circles are over, again, 3 different continents: Asia, Africa, and Antarctica. So square still beats that one. Now we have triangle, the Mesosaurus. We have the bottom of South America and Africa. So they're on the same continents, but if we were to draw a circle around them and measure their distance, we have this one and we have this one. We can see that the squares are inside on both of these. So the squares are closer together and over a smaller area. So we would answer the Cynocanthus. It's my best guess at how to pronounce that. But the square organism would go for number 12. All right, question 13. The picture below shows a peacock. Many of the early peacocks did not look like they do today. Their feathers were typically not as bright nor as large. So why did the peacocks develop larger, brighter feathers? So the larger, brighter feathers were an attraction for mates. So in order for them to reproduce, they have to attract a mate because they reproduce sexually. And if we had that genetic variation where one peacock had brighter feathers, the ladies thought it was more attractive, so that peacock got to breed. He passed those genes on to his offspring, and the cycle continued until majority of the population gathered that trait of having the larger, brighter feathers. So once it reached the whole population, that is natural selection. All right, so if we have genes that are responsible for new traits that help a species survive,